Aye, kuwe kuamadue.
Aye, kuwe kuamadue.
Aye, kuwe kuamadue.
Aye, kuwe kuamadue.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Shawn Ginwright. I am a professor, a father, a husband, community member here in Oakland, and just a lover of black young people.
Excellent. Well, we'll get right into it. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. My mother and father met in Jacksonville. My mom is from this place called Trenton, Florida, and my father was born in Chicago. I was born there. I left Jacksonville pretty early. I must have been 4 or 5 years old. My family moved out to Southern California, outside of LA, a place called Riverside, and pretty much grew up in a really working class, working poor neighborhood in that area until until the neighborhood started to change. It got pretty bad, and I remember the first day, or the first time I saw somebody fight with a knife and guns and stuff, and then my parents, I don't know how they did it. I think my father must have had a GI loan or something, but he was able to move our family from one part of town to the next where there were better schools. And so I grew up in I grew up in 2 parts of Riverside, and then a little bit when I was in Jacksonville, Florida.
Interesting. And you just mentioned, the neighborhood changing, and you said you could remember, once you start seeing kind of, people fighting, but knives, and then just, going forward with that. And
yeah. I mean, it was a big shift because moving from where where we first were to the primarily white neighborhood, it was more of a affluent neighborhood. And again, I don't know how my parents did it, but they bought this house, small house, and it was all white neighborhood. So the school we went to was all white, or primarily white. And it was a kind of a culture shock. I still have my friends though from my old neighborhood, so they would come and visit. They were like my brothers, right? And so they would come and spend the night, and they would. So we maintained those friendships, but we also, me and my brothers were also kind of surrounded in a lake of whiteness, right? And so that was challenging because my first lesson was trying to navigate that, right? Trying to figure out, do I fit in and try to talk like white folks? Do I maintain my identity? And it was kind of like schizophrenia. So primarily going through high school, I didn't have a foundation, or I didn't have a model of like how am I supposed to be until I got into college, and then I started taking Black Studies classes, and that really kind of gave me a sense of direction and rootedness to allow me to navigate San Diego State, which was primarily white, but we had a very strong black community there, and where I really cut my teeth, so to speak.
I hear that. Do you have any siblings?
I have 2 brothers. Both my brothers are, I have an older brother and a younger brother. I'm the only one that went to college. My older brother's a truck driver. He's probably like in Detroit right now. And my younger brother is a barber by trade. Yeah.
Nice. And what would you say, or who would you say influenced you the most as a child?
As a child, who influenced me the most, it was my parents. My mother and father. My father passed away in 2020, and but they were together the whole time. So a lot of my friends, they didn't have their fathers around. So my father became affectionately known as Papa G. So everybody called him Papa G, G for Ginwright, right? And so my friends would call him Papa G. So we started calling him Papa G. And so, but he played, of course, played a significant role in my life, giving me big and small lessons, I remember things he would say, like, like something would break around the house, and he would say things like, well, you start with the cheapest solution and work your way up. So I still use that now. If my car breaks or something happens, I start with the cheapest solution and then work my way up. Instead, never half-assed do anything. So my father would work on the car. We always working on cars. And so I know I'd be out there with him, watching him, and he would tell me how to fix things that were broken. When we bought the house in the other side, in the white neighborhood in Riverside, he landscaped the whole thing. So he taught me how to lay concrete and, irrigation. And so I still do that now. I kind of design my own backyard. And then my mother, and I had my mother, and then I was also fortunate to be raised by two other amazing women. My mother's sister, who we call Mama Joyce, and then my father's sister, we call her Auntie. So I was kind of surrounded by them, and they're the ones that really kind of influenced me to go to college, value of family. My father was very much a family-rooted man. My father always wanted to be a farmer. Yeah, it's a long story. I don't want to get into the story, but they had some, well, I'll tell you. It's an interesting story. His father, William Ginwright Sr., was deeded a large plot of land in this place called Kissimmee, Florida. And at the time, Kissimmee, Florida was mostly swamps and just fields. And then they were able to clear it and do, create a farm. And he would take my father out of school for months to work the fields.
Wow.
So around 1970s, my grandfather passed away, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the property. And actually before my grandfather passed away, they were trying to figure out what to do with the property. And this company bought the property. The small company at the time, in 1970, called Disney. And they built Disney World on it.
Wow.
So part of Disney World is the property that Disney World is actually not in Orlando. It's in a place called Kissimmee, and Kissimmee is where my folks had that land. So part of Disney World is on the property that we sold them probably for $2. I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying how much your father influenced you.
My father had a significant influence on me. Taught me lessons, work ethic. Me and my brothers, we couldn't lay around on Saturdays. Play. We didn't have video games back then, but we couldn't lay around. There was always something to do. My dad would leave the house at 6 and say that the whole yard got to be cut, leaves got to be raked by the time I get back. So he'd be back. That means we have to have it done by by 8. Because we knew he was coming. So every Saturday was us doing stuff, And so he really taught us the importance of work. My father he was working class, man. So he didn't go to college. He barely finished high school, but he was a worker. So my father had 2 jobs most of my life. He worked at this place called UARCO, which is UARCO's business form. So before there were Kinkos, before there was Ditto machines, everything you had to get printed had to go to a factory. So these factories, my father worked in one of those factories. And then he also worked as a auto body repair, right? Painting and patching cars. And so, for a long time when I was growing up, I didn't really have a close relationship with my father because he was just working all the time. But as I grew older, I grew to appreciate him in a lot more than I had previously in my younger life. One, because most of my college he helped pay for, and they were working poor, man. So my dad and they were just working, right? And so they helped send me to college. And so the value of work ethic was something that was really significant. My mother, I think my mother gave me the passion and love for words. She used to read to us all the time. And we used to watch, movies, and we would, talk about the movies, but mostly she would just read to us, and, we would that kind of develop the love for, I developed the love for writing and words, I think, from my mama.
Excellent. And one of the things I heard you mention earlier is once you went to school, I believe, in San Diego?
Yeah, San Diego State University.
and just talking about how much your identity as coming up was influenced by that, because especially coming out of going to like a white school in high school and things like that, and you mentioned taking some classes there that really impacted you. I'm curious, what does being black mean in America to you?
What does it mean to me?
Yes.
What it means to me is to recognize the wounds of our past, but not get defined by it. And it means that I have to acknowledge the tragedy of oppression and slavery, but not be defined by it. It means that I have to recognize and heal myself through my own Africanness, because that's part of my wound, right? And so, for me, I think being African is more of a journey than it's a destination rather than it's more of a journey than a destination. Meaning that my growth in my African and in blackness is always changing and growing. And my thinking about what it meant to be black in America when I was 20 is very different now. And so for me now, I'm much more in a place in my life where leaning into my imagination and dreaming is as healing as me learning about being black was when I was 20. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
And so I try to always even with my children, I tell my children that they recognize and understand where they come from, but they're not defined by it. And I always think that that's important to me. That's important to all of my students I teach, because there's a way in which blackness has become calcified, as if it just doesn't change. And it is rooted only in the past and never in the future. And so part of who I am and what I see now is that we always have to constantly be rooted in what happened, that tragedy, but also reaching for our greatest aspirations about what it means to be black here. This is what I think where jazz comes from, right? This is where the Harlem Renaissance comes from. This is where hip hop comes from. It's always rooted in a reality, but it's not defined by that reality. It's always seeking something else. And so that's where I see my role, my definition, my aspiration of black, of what it means to be black here.
Like that. That's seeking in just the way you just described it, in terms of not just being the destination, the journey that is associated with as you've gone through your life, and just kind of different periods, experiencing new things and getting some more clarity, and it's just kind of all being added rather than just like you say, not being defined by one thing or a terrible past or something. It's constantly.
Yeah, and I think a lot, for me at least, and a lot of other folks have other ways to talk about it, but for example, just the word struggle, right? So I'm not going to define my blackness with struggle, right? And that's because while I recognize I have work to do and we'll always have work to do, my ancestors struggled so that I could actually be happy. They struggled so that I could have some privilege. They struggled. And so if I'm not leaning into that, then I'm in some ways not honoring what they put in, right? And so anyway, I'm kind of blabbering here, but blackness means to me that we always have to lean into other kinds of possibilities for who we are.
I hear that. And what would you say is one of the biggest or most important lessons you learned from being in the black community?
Man. One of the most important, let me give you 3 lessons, right? I think the first lesson is that we have a purpose, and that it's a gift if we find our purpose young. I think a lot of people still search for their purpose. So I was given a purpose. I was given a mission. And my mission early on was to support black youth. And so that lesson was, for me, is that once we accept our mission or our purpose from the higher power, to walk in faith and do it. Don't worry about the outcome. And the evidence of my life and career has been lockstep with that.
Yep.
Because there's things that should not have been possible in my life had I not walked by faith. They're just things that I was able to do, but I just followed. So that's one, is that we have a purpose, and the purpose, if we find it, the path will open up. I think the other lesson working in this community is that we have to balance the work that we do with joy. Because we can become so defined and calcified and angry and bitter and depressed, and all those things are very real. And if we don't claim joy in some pieces of our lives, then the struggle and the challenges in our communities can sink us, and we need everybody. And so that lesson came from me working again with a lot of Black young people and families here in Oakland that have a lot of problems, right? Mm-hmm. And for me to be able to be present and provide some leadership, to provide some vision, that means I had to take care of myself. I had to have spaces, right? I swim, for example. Well, I used to swim because they closed the pools in Oakland now, but I swim. Yeah. Swimming to me is like meditation, right? Yeah. I ride bikes, right? And so those spaces rupture, they provide a space, right, for me to actually clear out so that I can go back in. This woman told me, man, she said, I don't know if this is a third lesson or not, but I was in Cleveland, a few weeks ago, and I was doing a keynote speech, and then afterwards she came up to me. She was Lebanese, and she said, "Oh, that was a great speech." Da, 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 da. I just got back from Morocco. I'm like, "Wow, do you have family in Morocco? What were you doing in Morocco?" It sounds like such a fantastic place to be. She said, "No, I went to Morocco so that I could breathe." And I'm like, "What do you mean so that you could breathe?" And she said, "Well, sometimes living here as a person of color in America, we don't realize, just like fish don't realize they're in water, that we don't realize the thickness of toxicity that we're swimming and breathing every day." And I'm not talking about, she wasn't talking about like poisons. She was talking about stress and hatred and viciousness and shame, that environment has become toxic. And so she said, sometimes, about twice every year, I need to go breathe. And so she leaves the country. Wow. And she says, I go somewhere else where I could breathe again. And I'm there for a while. And then once I can breathe, I feel stronger, so I come back so I can continue my fight, right? I thought that was just a wonderful, beautiful metaphor, like how I think the lesson of taking care of ourselves in this work is, right? That sometimes if we're not conscious that we're breathing toxins, we forget that there's fresh air. Yeah. That the world ain't like, the world actually has love for Black people. Yeah. Right? But here, just the other day, man, just because of everything that's going on, just around my house, I've been running, exercising around my house for years. For the first time, I was like, shit, is it safe? Right? I'm like, shit, is something gonna go down? Right? It's just constant nagging on the back of your mind. Yeah. And so this idea of breathing, how are we breathing is probably the third lesson. And if we're not intentionally finding places to breathe, then that means we're used to toxic air. Yeah.
I was gonna ask too, so as we were talking about, you began to talk about when you were at San Diego State and some of the lessons you learned there. What did you end up studying, and did you decide to pursue that for the
Yeah, I mean, I had a transformative experience at San Diego State. I came to San Diego State, like I said, from a primarily white high school. and didn't really know what I was going to study. And I got involved, deeply involved with the black community there. And the black community at the time, so I don't know if, so you're kind of young, but you probably don't remember the show, oh no, my goodness, so let me back up. So during the time I went to college, this was the era of Do the Right Thing. She's Gotta Have It. Spike Lee, we had never seen anything like that. We had never seen black excellence on the films. So political ideology and political engagement became fashion, right? We had these medallions on, fist, right? It was not only fashion, but it was also part of our identity, right? And so the environment, just the environment itself, it was almost as if we had created our own HBCU at a primarily white university. It was amazing. There was a TV show, I can't remember, with Kadeem Hardison and
Yeah, Different World.
Different World, that's it, Different World, right? So there were shows that reflected who we were, what we were doing. So we were watching the shows of black kids first time going to college. So there was this sort of seductiveness of what it was like going to college at that time. We had Do the Right Thing, we had She's Gotta Have It, we had black films, we had shows about black young people going to college, and so we were feeling ourselves, right? And we believed at that time that we could do whatever we wanted. We would rent out the whole amphitheater and have step shows, and we just created our own HBCU, right? And so part of my experience was also taking Black Studies courses, right? And I had a number of amazing professors, one of which is now the Secretary of State for California, Dr. Shirley Weber. Amazing mentor and friend, and to this very day. So that was my mentor, Dr. Shirley Weber. Another professor named Dr. Danny Scarborough, who at the time I didn't know what it meant to be gay. Like, I didn't understand like that because I had never been in an environment with gay men or women. He was a literature professor. So my love for words came from my mom, but they were probably perfected with Dr. Scarborough. Wow. I remember Dr. Scarborough's first day of class. He walked in with a lavender cape and walked it around, and he had on his shoes, and he was just fabulous, right? And I was like, what the fuck is this? What is he doing, right? And we were reading the book, Their Eyes Are Watching God. And the way that he taught the book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, changed my life. I didn't know that words could have such deep meaning, right? He would teach to the point where it would bring tears to his eyes because he was teaching from a place of his own story, right? Wow. We didn't know at the time that, we didn't know what the term AIDS was. Didn't know, it wasn't even called AIDS at the time, but he had gotten sick. And then we learned that it was AIDS, and he passed away before I graduated. But he left an indelible, delicious mark on my love for words and my love for black culture and the study of the Harlem Renaissance. And Dr. Weber mentored me to really, really push me to understand whatever I want to achieve, you should do it. Right? She was clear about that. And so, and there were some others, but being in that Black Studies department as a student changed me, and which is probably why I got a degree at San Diego State in communications, and I got a master's degree in speech communications, and then I enrolled in, I got into a doctorate degree at UC Berkeley in sociology of education, focused on black communities. But that's probably why I ultimately taught in ethnic studies at Santa Clara and then black studies at San Francisco State. And so that's been the joy of my life, is to be able to give black students what I got when I was in college.
And getting a chance to teach a lot of other students, particularly black students, what has been, I guess, your focus in sociology around that? How, you know, whether it's through the teaching and helping, like how have you cultivated that over the years since you've studied and since, got all of your degrees and things of that nature?
Say the question again. I want to make sure I answer your question.
I guess how do you, I guess, implement your practice and what you've learned and taught and, having students and being part of the community? How was, what's that like?
Man, the biggest lesson students haven't been given is that their job, their role in college is not to just get a good grade and complete college. Their job is to imagine what their lives should be. And that's very different. 99% of the students I talk to, black students, if I ask them, why are you in college? They respond, well, I'm here so I can get a good job. Right? Mm-hmm. And I would think to myself, like, wow, what's such a low bar, right? We're giving you world-class education, and all you want to do is get a job. So my job, when I would teach, particularly black students, was to get them to think way beyond getting a job, which is the lowest bar. And I would say, well, why don't you have an aspiration of creating jobs? Why don't you have an aspiration of creating your own company? Why don't you have an aspiration of just something else than just get a job? And I realized where that comes from, of course, because their parents probably didn't, their parents wanted them to be able to be self-sufficient, and I understand that. But my biggest job at San Francisco State was really as a kind of a therapist, man, of trying to heal black students' wounds of their own insecurity and their own inferiority complex. Because I worked at a white university before I was at San Francisco State. And, the sense of entitlement white students, I was impressed, right? So white students would come to me when I was at Santa Clara University, and they would say, like, Dr. Ginwright, I really enjoyed this class, blah, 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 but you gave me a B. Can you explain this? I'm like, well, first of all, what do you mean explain it? Well, you gave me a B instead of an A. And I'm like, damn, look at that. Their mindset is, obviously, I'm the shit enough where I should be getting an A from all my professors, whereas my black students would be completely satisfied with a C. You feel me?
Yeah.
They would not challenge, so they didn't have the same mindset. White students they structured the whole school year around white students going off to Europe for the semester. Y'all, I'm telling you the truth, man. Right? To go off and learn, because they understood the value of when students go away and come back. It's a much more richer experience, right? And so I encourage my students to leave this country for at least a semester. Because their job at San Francisco State is not to just get a job, but to actually to do something much more broader. So it was my role as a professor was is mostly to support students in that way.
Interesting. And would you say that had been one of the more challenging aspects of your career, is trying to, I guess, especially get black students to kind of reframe their thinking in terms of not just a job, but producing jobs for other people or companies?
Yeah.
And
well, it's the same. I mean, the most challenging aspect of my career is being a professor and a practitioner, right? Mm-hmm. That's challenging, and that's the same work. So in the community, I'm working with young people, right? I created an organization that has a summer camp every year for black kids, which essentially is about healing them for their trauma. And we've been doing that. We were doing that for like 20-something years. We created another organization right now called Flourish Agenda, which is trying to train educators and teachers and practitioners around the country on how to heal young people. And that work is very similar to the work I do with students, right? So the students come in wounded as well, and students come in with some of the same kinds of issues that the younger young people that I work with come in. So it's really the same, but the challenge is being able to do both, right? Be a practitioner as well as a scholar, and that's been most, it's okay. It's been challenging, but I think I wouldn't regret it. I wouldn't go back and change it.
I hear that. I'm curious, just with your work too, I want to switch gears. When did you get involved with the Brotherhood of Elders Network, and what is that experience?
Man, the Brotherhood of Elders Network, so I'm going to tell you the root start of Brotherhood of Elders Network. Okay. Brother Pedro Noguera, Arnold Perkins, Afrie Kwamina, I think Greg Hodge was there, Antwia Combe. The idea Pedro and a couple of folks had, and Howie Pinter-Hughes, we met at UC Berkeley at one of those research houses, right? And the idea was, let's just meet right now. Let's just come together as black men to see if we can, kind of just work together, form some kind of commitment to work together in a different way. And we kind of met a couple times. Now this was probably, my son was really young, so this was probably in 2002, 2003. It was a while ago, right? And so we did that for a while, and then it kind of petered off. And then about 5 years later, I got a call from Baba Arnold Perkins, and he said, "Hey, remember that we tried? We're gonna do it again. I need you to show up at Greg's house, and I need you to bring 3 other younger brothers with you." And I was like, okay. So, when Baba Arnold says something, you just do it. Yep. So we did it, and we met. We met at Greg's house. And the first meeting was probably myself. It was me, Quayle, Greg, Baba Arnold. I can't remember everybody. It was about maybe 6 or 7 of us. And then we would just trying to, we were like, we need fellowship because we out here doing it on our own, we out here like islands, right? And so it felt good to just be, right? And then it more and more brothers started coming, and we would meet at Greg's, Greg's house, right? And it began to grow. And early on, there was a sort of debate whether or not, what are we going to do? 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 And I was always advocating for fellowship. We don't always got to do stuff. The fellowship is the doing, right? Because that's what I needed, and I still need it. I need to be around brothers that are positive, that are doing something. So I was fed when we would get together, right? And so that was the genesis of it. And I think, I don't remember what year. I mean, you have to forgive me on those years, but Bob Arnold, I remember, man, I was on the board for the California Endowment. It's a large foundation here in California, and Bob Arnold, one of his employees, somebody he had hired is now like a senior VP up at the endowment. He said, "Hey man, we need some money. I need you to set up a meeting with Tony Iton." And so I set up the meeting, brought me there, and Tony did his thing, and then Bob Arnold said, "Hey man, we're going to need about $800,000 or something." I don't know the exact number, but Arnold was like, Tony was like, I don't know. I'm like, man, just get it, bring it in front of the board. We'll make it happen. Right? I guess I should be putting this on I don't care, man. I don't give a shit. But anyway, it happened. And so he was, Bob Arnold was very clear about what he needed and what was required to actually support this group of black men that was really going to continue to build and grow, and now it is what it is. So, yeah, it was a. We would call people. I remember the first money we got. We hired somebody. We hired Dean, and we would be calling people like every week. We have our own list, and we call, "Hey, you coming to the meeting? You coming to the meeting? You coming to the meeting?" Because we realized just sending out emails wasn't working, and so it became a community.
Understood. How would you say it's impacted your life over the course of this time?
Well, yeah, I mean, it provided me the fellowship that I needed, right? And sometimes when we're out there doing our thing, we don't realize we're out there doing our thing, right? And so One of my best friends always told me, if you're the smartest in your crew, you need to get another crew, right? You need to be around people who make you challenge you, make you think. Like, you're not the smartest or the, and so going to the Brotherhood of Elders, that's how I feel and felt every time. Like, I'm learning something from young people, I'm learning something from the elders, I'm contributing whatever I can contribute, and I'm being fed, right? When I leave, I feel like I've been, it's almost church-like, right? We participate in ritual, we talk, we strategize, we fellowship, and I haven't been in a while for a lot of other reasons in my life, but it's really made me deeply connected to a group of black men that was missing in my life.
Interesting. That's excellent. And you spoke earlier about all the work that you've done in organizations you formed to help young people, and that's been part of your journey this whole time.
Yep.
I'm curious, what would be some advice you would give to your younger self?
To my younger self?
To your younger self.
Oh, wow. I think, advice is part of what I would say is part of what I still tell myself. I still have deep insecurities around things. Like, as a young person, I was insecure about, if I should go to college or what I should do, or, just always questioning whether I was good enough to do something. That young Shawn still shows up, right? It shows up whenever I engage in something that I've never done before. When I became on the board member, the chair of the board for the California Endowment, that young Shawn showed up. What the hell are you doing? Do you know what you're doing? Did you say it right? Are you slurring your words? Are you talking white enough? Are you talking to that voice? When I came a university professor, that insecure Shawn showed up. And so I guess what I would tell myself is, it's okay. You are competent enough and strong and smart enough, and that enjoy the journey and don't worry about the destination as much, right? And I think a lot of my self-talk is still that. It's not like that issue is resolved in me, right? I still, whenever something new comes up, I go, oh shit, can I do this? How am I supposed to do that? Where can I learn? The beauty now is being a little older, is you have a lot more tools to choose from, right? And just a little story, right? Get a little story. I just said tools. My father, again, I go back to my father. He always worked with his hands. And so when my father was younger, he had a toolbox, right? He had all his tools. He would be able to fix anything in his toolbox. And he loved tools. And as he grew older, his toolbox grew. He had bigger toolbox to the point where before he passed away, the entire garage looked like Home Depot. Literally, he had all kind of tools, right? And so I think that happens when we grow older. We just have more tools, right? We have more tools to solve more problems. And so even though I have, those insecurities may show up, I have other tools I can use, and I have people I can call and advice I can get from other folks.
Wow, that's excellent. That's excellent. And you have spoken about your father a few times. How has the lessons that you've learned from him impacted how you've raised your children? And what's that been like for you?
Yeah. I mean, my mother and father were from the South, so I was raised like to working class black couple from the South. So I got whooped. I got everything, all the, you don't talk back, you don't, ain't no such thing as an allowance, like all that stuff, right? Like, what is it? And so when me and my wife started with my son, she's a therapist, and I'm educated, so I would say things when we would bring my dad. I'm like, Dad, we don't whoop our children, and he would just laugh. What you mean you don't whoop them? I said, we don't do that. We put them on timeout. He was like, time what? The hell is a time what? Right? Yeah. And so I remember one time my son, he said something smart to me. Like, no, Dad, I ain't doing that, and threw something, man. He was really a kid. And my dad looked at me like, what, you gonna give him one of them time things right now, or you gonna whoop his ass? That's what he said to me. And so my dad was very brilliant, but very plain. And he said after that incident, he said, look, son, everybody, listen, and I'll never forget this, and I say this to my kids too. He said, listen, son, everybody understands ass whooping. From a child to a nation, and everything in between. And what he was meaning was, like, you don't have to beat your kids, but you have to understand there's limits.
Yeah.
And when you give them that limit, there has to be the consequence. And he said, this is the same thing with a nation. If a nation acts up, another nation is going to put it in check. And he would say stuff like that. I don't know where I'm going with that story. But, my kids were raised loving who they are as black. But they didn't know. My daughter, I remember, she was sitting in a circle with other black girls. And there's one black girl who was really light. She almost looked white. And they would go, oh, I'm dark chocolate. Oh, I'm milk chocolate. And da-da-da-da. My daughter was probably 5 years old at the time. And went to the white girl, and she said, oh, I'm light. And my daughter was like, oh, it's okay. So, do you hear the psychology of that? My daughter said to look to the white girl and said, oh, it's okay. Because for her, she was the norm. And the white girl was something out. She was on the outside. And it just, when I watched that, I was like, wow, at 5 years old, you're already feeling like this. Her everything around her life was black, pictures on the walls. She had a black dentist. She had a black doctor. When we go to the grocery store, she see black people. It was so from at a young age for both my kids, they didn't really experience that thing that I experienced moving from a black community to a white community. They got it probably when they went to college, but not even really in high school. A little bit. But by the time they got to high school, they were pretty much solid. They were pretty much clear about who they were. There wasn't like any shame. They didn't have no, oh, I want blue eyes and long hair, and they didn't have any of that. They were pretty clear.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Last question. What would be some advice you'd give to the next generation?
Advice I'd give to the next generation. It's kind of like that advice that Maya Angelou gave, right? I would say that, in many ways, your debt has been paid. Go live. Go do it. Go do the thing you want to do. Like, the debt, the work, the struggle, the sacrifice, a lot of that has been paid. Go live. And I'm not saying that to say don't do the struggle or not to continue to fight for justice. We must, and we always have to do that. But for the younger generation, and I see that happening too. I see young folks kind of redefining themselves, they're living in other countries now, and just redefining what work looks like, right? Yeah. And I so much celebrate that. Even my kids are like that. They're talking about, moving to Mexico and, going to other places. And so I encourage that because I think through that experience, we're going to evolve as a people, right? We're going to evolve because we'll become different. We'll have a different gaze on the world. We'll have a different way of understanding who we are. We'll have a different way of relating to one another. And so I deeply encourage that kind of imagination for the next generation.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate having you and just you sharing your words of wisdom and being the final interview for the entire project.
That's an honor.
Yes.
Double honor. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we really are glad to end on such a high note. So we appreciate your time.
Appreciate the opportunity.